All right, so Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim and Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, everyone. Inshallah, today we're going to be doing our tafsir. And yesterday we basically went into the Quran because remember, we are going to be starting a new page. And since we were starting a new page, we would go over the ayat first and explain it like a kind of a surfaced explanation and surface tafsir. And then we go into Tafsir al-Qurtubi in a more thorough tafsir and more detailed tafsir. And we left off at here. So let's really go over what we did yesterday really quick. So after the ayat, we're laying out the resources. We're laying out and exposing the resources that the disbelievers were using, whether the disbelievers, meaning the pagan Arab, or whether this is talking about the Bani Israel themselves. So this is basically laying out the different types of ideologies and the different types of resources. One resource was their own personal opinion. The second resource is basically their own interpretation to the text. And then at the end of the day, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala exposes whether those that had based their resources or their legislation based on their own biases and their own selves, basically. And then the second one is their own interpretation of being selective in how they interpret the resources. And at the end, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala also exposes that sometimes when you're looking at legislation, it may be one based on eliminating what is evil or trying to maximize the good. So that's number one. Or number two, it might be for discipline. So we're talking about legislation, it might be for discipline. And number three, it might be a punishment as well. So we commented on that one, but then the ayah would further continue on the following page and say, فَإِن كَذَبُوكَ فَقُلْ رَبُّكُمْ ذُو رَحْمَةٍ وَاسِعَةٍ. Now, of course, coming into the second portion, after exposing their ideology, after exposing their resources, then the ayah basically takes a little shift and says, okay, well, after this had been exposed, in other words, the truth basically revealed, the truth exposed in terms of their discrepancy, their conflicting evidences, and their biases, or even how they were making up their own interpretation at the end of the day. If they deny after all of this had been exposed to their faces, and after the truth being there and being clarified to them, then if they still continue and insist to deny, then tell them your Lord Almighty is magnificent in his mercy. And we talked about how the whole ayat, the whole da'wah was always putting forward first, of course, and prioritizing bringing glad tidings, reminding people of mercy, reminding people of hope before jumping into threatening or warning the people that may reject the da'wah. And we talked about the different ahadith that also teach the same teachings to always bring in that hope rather than jump onto the wagon of fear or probably threat and etc. سيقول الذين أشركوا. Then certainly those that associated partners with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they would then make a claim that if Allah did not want us to be in this status or in this type of ideology, or at least adopting this type of culture, then there would have been a divine intervention. There would have been a divine let's say interference right there to actually tell us, well, no, you can't do that. But then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala clarified that, even the nations before you, even when they had a divine interference or a divine revelation to explain to them that what they are practicing, and that whether we're talking about the legislation or whether we're talking about the ideas and the ideologies that they are basically basing their life on, and how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was already sending them these resources, but they made the same claim. that there was no divine intervention, there was no divine interference, there was no divine revelation to tell us that somehow what we're doing is wrong. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala basically right there exposes and says, well, I want you to show me where's that divine resource that proves that what you have is proven by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala or is accepted by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and that's that ilm. Now, this is really important to just know when we speak about that being ilm, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is giving us that inference that the most important knowledge that you would embrace is really the knowledge of how you understand the world, how you understand the basis of the vision, basically, that you interpret your life, interpret your purpose, interpret the different definitions of ethics and etc. That's the true ilm. That's the true ilm, because you could easily get into different narratives and create narratives that are not necessarily based on ilm, but based on speculation. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala then it says, well, as a result of this conversation, this debate that we had done before in exposing your own biases in your legislature, or how you created your own legislature based on your own preferences and not based on truth and not based on any ilm or inspiration from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then the result and the conclusion is going to be إن تتبعون إلا الظن. Then the truth of the matter that you're only following the word تتبعون. Why don't you look at that one, because the root is تبع. The root تبع for تتبعون, but then just remember, whenever you would have the root itself, you're going to say tabi'a is the root of the word, then each and every single additional, whether we're talking about a consonant or whether we're talking about a haraka or whether we're talking about an additional wording in it, then you're going to see, okay, well, that right there is telling us that there's a continuation, it's a present tense, and then this gradual process, 2, there's a repetition, and 3, there's that consistency. So what were they doing? Well, there's a gradual process that probably started out with their ancestors doing a certain thing, then they started building on it, and then they started adding different interpretations, different narratives, and then they started considering it as a legacy to hold on to. So then they started making it as an identity. They became so patriotic about it. So when you look at that one, you're talking about a gradual process. You're talking about a consistency. It became a habit that became something that they are considering as part of their identity, etc. So إن تتبعون إلا الظن. I can see that it's telling me that the internet connection is not good. Let's hope it doesn't continue to tell me that. So إن تتبعون إلا الظن وإن أنتم إلا تخرصون. So I want you to look at that word إن تتبعون إلا الظن. What is الظن? الظن is basically speculation. الظن is when you don't have a resource. And we don't mean by a resource, yeah, I have this book, or I have, I don't know, Friedrich Nietzsche is basically coming in as, yeah, right there, or Sigmund Freud, or whatever it is. Here's my evidence to prove something. And this is perhaps, I don't know, Schopenhauer, whatever it is, this philosopher is coming up with these ideas, because at the end is that is dhan. That is dhan, because their take is not divine. Their interpretation, their narratives are basically coming from their own biases, their own visions, or their own interpretations to life, to interpretations to ethics, perhaps, etc. Is really a result of a number of different views that they basically had founded about how they understood life and how they understood God and how they understood human beings, etc. And that was based on them. And therefore, the true ilm would be where it actually is based on understanding why you were created. 2, who created you. 3, where you're going and the purpose of your life. In other words, the purpose that preceded your existence. What is the meaning of life? If that person is not capable of explaining all of this in from a valid resource, like a divine resource, then all they are basing their whole theory of life, whole theory of its purpose, or whole theory of what makes ethics, etc., is all going to be based on speculation, and then without them realizing that's going to channel and that's going to determine all the different areas about their definition of life, and its whole implication is going to be based on il-khars. What is il-khars? Il-khars, when you basically, when you make a haymat, okay, so they would get the different twigs and the different branches from the palm trees, and then they connect them together to make like a mat based on that. That's al-khars. Okay, so al-khars is really getting these twigs and these branches and then connecting them together to make like a carpet or like a mat. Okay, carpet is made of basically, material and fabric, but that takhrusun, or that kind of mat, is actually made of these twigs and these sticks in order to basically sit on it and not sit on the floor. So they would take out these little things. Now, you understand what I'm talking about. So when you look at takhrusun, it makes you think that you have a foundation, but the truth of the matter is that the twigs and those sticks that you had created and put together, at least, yes, it did kind of protect you from the different pebbles on the floor, etc. It kind of gave you somewhat of something better than standing on the floor. But the truth of the matter is that those twigs are actually the items that, one, they don't last for long, because once they're emptied from their coring, they basically start flattening. That's number one. Number two is that they basically would still bring in perhaps just different things from the ground, etc. They can still go in between these little openings in between these twigs, and then it basically goes to the surface. So in other words, it's not a firm basis. That's basically what it means. It's not a firm basis in terms of, seeing the metaphor in it. Seeing the metaphor in these words is helping us see the relationship, because what a metaphor is, it's basically taking different words that may be the literal words, and again, the similarities or the commonalities between whatever you're basically using as a figurative thing to compare something to, and then you're basically putting in these commonalities for you to get a visual parable. So we're looking at in antum illa takhrusun, letting us know that these people, they may adopt a certain philosophy, a certain narrative, a certain vision. For the person coming from the outside, it may seem like it's a good basis, it's a good foundation, it's going to give me a protection, it's going to give me some solid grounding. But the truth of the matter is that it's empty of real coring, and it actually is not safe. And all it does is that it makes you think that there's something connected, or these ideas are somehow coherent, when the truth of the matter is that they're not actually coherent. They just are connected together in a certain way to make it somehow seem solid. But the truth of the matter, you take one out and the whole thing collapses. The whole thing collapses, and it basically becomes nothing of what you had thought was solid, coherent, or even a strong evidence. So when you look at in antum illa takhrusun, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is letting them know, after exposing that their ideas are just based on speculation, And just because X or Y or Z had mentioned this philosophy or had mentioned, this vision, it doesn't necessarily make it a solid evidence. And this is really important. Studying epistemology is extremely important to understand our basis of thought and to understand where these ideas basically originated from, because without us realizing, many times, especially the younger generation, when they go to school, they go to universities, and they start, getting all these ideas, and then they think, well, studies say and studies prove this and this and this, and not realizing that these studies were not necessarily objective, but these studies were backed up by certain institutions, certain agendas, and then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is letting us become the ones to be above all of that, above all of these presentations, and actually connect to the word Allahu Akbar. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the greatest. So then the ayah continues. Qul. Now the ayah tells you, I want you to go beyond all of that and say it. Now, what are you doing? Now you are the one acting as the teacher, acting as the influencer, and not the one to be the consumer. So now you're standing up as a Muslim to demonstrate, to teach, and say, فَلِلَّهِ الْحُجَّةُ الْبَالِغَةُ. For the Lord Almighty has the ultimate, the grand evidence, the grand and clear evidence, and therefore the resource to help us understand life, to help us understand the definition of justice / legislature, and 3, to help us understand all those things that connect us between why we were created and who created us and where are we heading in this life. So فَلِلَّهِ الْحُجَّةُ الْبَالِغَةُ. When you look at the word al-baligha, that it's a description that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's evidence is baligha. Baligha, whether it reached the climax of what makes the clearest evidence, or at least the strongest evidence, or the complete and ultimate level of evidence where it doesn't contain any discrepancies, does not contain any conflicting evidences, and certainly even the results of these legislations are going to be in service to mankind, whether in eliminating evil or maximizing good. So فَلَوْ شَاءَ لَهَدَاكُمْ أَجْمَعِينَ. Now, what is that in response to? Well, they basically said, well, if those evidences were always there, how come we didn't hear of it? And how come we didn't receive anything of what we know in order to correct, quote unquote, to correct our behavior and to correct our vision? So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is letting them know that, the previous nations, that they did already get such inspiration or such revelations, but they had refused to take them. Now, this is extremely important because you will have today, some people might say, well, explain to me why we cannot find, for example, the name of Prophet Musa alayhi salam in Egyptian calligraphy, for example. Why can't we find the name of Prophet Ibrahim in the temples of Babylon? Why don't we find any of that? Why can't we find perhaps the names of different prophets on those temples, or etc.? Now, here's one thing, is that those temples, and most of them were religious temples. In fact, most of those temples and all those most important temples were evolved around a certain religious belief. So whether you're talking about the Aztecs, or whether you're talking about Egypt, or whether you're talking about perhaps the religious temples in China, India, you name it, they were usually religious temples, and those are the ones that basically stood. And here's the thing, is that those civilizations also evolved around a certain ideology that made them put all the effort, all their money, and certainly all their potentials in order to contribute for this religious temple or religious monument or whatever it is. And then this became to us right now, just just this monument to commemorate or at least reveal some of the civilization or some of the information that they had known about themselves, or at least that they had thought that they had known about themselves. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is then exposing to us, those things to let us know that this isn't a civilization, but is actually jahiliyyah. At the same time, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is, but at the same time, those that might claim, well, why don't we see the names of Prophet Ibrahim in this area and Musa, etc.? Now, you want to remember these religious temples were there to commemorate who they thought was an important figure, to basically applaud those that they consider are important. And certainly they were not going to consider those that might have disagreed or disputed their ideas as important figures or even worthy of mention. So they weren't going to name Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam because they considered that he was an opposition or someone that was a heretic and therefore not worthy at all of being mentioned, and that these temples are supposed to be just to commemorate, just to glorify all the things that that would support our ideology, and therefore this is to evolve around our ideology. And certainly they did not think of it as a tablet to write history per se. They wanted to commemorate their own religion. They wanted to commemorate their own ideology, their own legislation, etc. And basically, those writings were to glorify a certain civilization, which is their civilization. And that's the same thing today when you would see the writings in history. You would say the ones to write history are usually the magnificent, or at least, the superior civilizations. And when they would write about the other civilizations, they would write about it as if it was one, inferior, two, not worthy of living, three, that it doesn't even exist. There's a really, that Zohran Momdani guy. His father was actually a really good historian. I used to love his books. His father, his name is Mahmoud Mamdani. His father, he actually wrote a couple books, but in one of his books, he actually exposed one thing about Western imperialism. And he talked about when we would see in the books West and East and West, but then there's no mention of Africa. There's, they would say, well, right there, considered it as Black, even though a person that is African is not Black, but they are brown in texture. But the reason why they would mention it as Black and portray it as Black is really because it was a way to consider that that area does not exist. They tried definitely to do the same with Asia or even the Muslim countries, but those civilizations were too strong and too recent to completely eliminate, that it wasn't possible to completely just not make any mention of it. But in terms of Africa, not only did they change in the drawing the size of the map to make it appear like it was way smaller than what it really is, but they also had colored it as it's a Black continent, as if it doesn't even exist. It's somewhere in the darkness, somewhere in the Black area. And therefore, these people, and of course, when you look at that evolution theory, considering that the Blacker you are, the more likely that you are in the primitive generation of evolution. Therefore, white man is the one to have the latest type of development. And therefore, the whiter you are, the more intelligent, the more the better abilities that you have in order to control the resources, to make use of the resources. So you still have that ideology. Just recently, can't remember who, but he basically was asked about the oil in the Muslim countries, and he says, well, they're just in areas that are basically not in the right hands. In other words, they don't know how to make a use of these resources. So we have to come in and take those resources to use it for the good. Because these people, as being Muslim, as being brown, they don't have this type of capability to understand how to make use of these resources, how to extract these resources, let alone be qualified and fit enough to bring the best of civilization with these resources. So Mahmoud Mamdani, going back to him, he basically exposes that ideology that basically it feeds that imperialist ideology, and then of course gives the imperialist agenda to basically see that, well, these people are not even at the level of being human enough, and therefore we would have the right to intervene in taking these resources because they're not human enough to use them for the good. So we would have to intervene as a white man and actually use it for what is good. And of course, when you see, just give me a second. And of course, when you see, for example, this type of ideology and how it basically would, in our modern times or even in the past times, it would eliminate the existence or even the life or even the meaning of those that actually exist even as a continent. Even as a continent, they basically had just painted it in black, like it's not even there. That's the same thing that different civilizations had, or different civilizations, or whether it's the pharaohs or whether it's the Babylon, kingdom or whatever it is. They would do the same thing and not mention those figures, those prophetic figures that basically came to oppose their shirk. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, فَلَوْ شَاءَ لَهَدَاكُمْ أَجْمَعِينَ. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala then lets them know that, well, just you having that free will does not necessarily mean that that free will was given to you to let that be as, yes, your own desires, your own drives to necessarily be the resource that you would understand this world in, but the resource is supposed to be Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and therefore your drives would basically be, or at least supposed to be, submitting to the Lord Almighty. So now he says, فَلَوْ شَاءَ لَهَدَاكُمْ أَجْمَعِينَ. The Lord Almighty would have, if he wanted to force you to not have free will and submit to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he would have been capable of doing so. Yet, قُلْ هَلُمَّ شُهَدَاءَكُمُ الَّذِينَ يَشْهَدُونَ أَنَّ اللَّهَ حَرَّمَ هَذَا. Then tell them. Now, I want you to look at that قُل right there. When you see on this page, let's just count how many quls we've got. Okay, here's the first qul right there. فَقُلْ رَبُّكُمْ. Then their second qul is right there. Then the third qul is right there. Then the fourth qul, let's see right there. Then this is the fourth qul. What is the word qul supposed to represent? Well, the word qul is supposed to represent that when others are coming in, whether discrepancies or whether conflicting ideas or whether creating a narrative or whether falsehood, whatever it is, that you have to come in. And sometimes we confuse between being humble and between being proud and arrogant. Okay, those are two different things. When you're being humble, sometimes to be over humble at the wrong time can actually put the defense, or at least make your defense for Islam sound very quiet, or sound very or sound lacking confidence. So you have to recognize when to come in and appear, or at least bring in this confidence. When you're doing da'wah, it is important to come in with somewhat of pride, with confidence, to basically teach others what they don't know. In other words, come in with Allahu Akbar, come in with La ilaha illallah, come in with the inspiration that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the greatest. So when you look at you're coming in as to teach, to inspire, to basically preach, to teach, preach, and certainly to educate and to enlighten others. So you come in qul. Certainly, this was directed at the Prophet ﷺ, but as Muslims, we would take the same inspiration from what the Prophet ﷺ was inspired to basically practice in his da'wah as a method, and we would take that as something that we would learn from as well. So when you look at قُلْ هَلُمَّ شُهَدَاءَكُمْ, and tell them, bring your witnesses. What witness are we talking about? We're not talking about witnesses as in figures, but we're talking about witnesses as in evidence, that would basically witness that the Lord Almighty had permitted or had legislated all that you claim, that basically that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had forbid certain things. فَإِن شَهِدُوا, yet if they witness, so in other words, if they witness, or at least if they bring their evidence, and they might actually bring you some studies and tell you, you know, this is what was proven, etc. Does that mean I would have to just submit to them and submit to their evidence? Then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, no, wait, not too fast. Even if they had brought something that may have seemed as pseudo evidence, you don't submit to it. فَلَا تَشْهَدْ مَعَهُمْ, don't witness with them. Don't adopt their claim. Don't adopt their narrative. Don't adopt their vision. Basically, فَلَا تَشْهَدْ مَعَهُمْ. What's the difference between shahada and the ru'ya? Well, when you look at فَلَا تَشْهَدْ مَعَهُمْ, when you look at the word tashhad, remember when we say أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله. When you say أشهد أن لا, why don't I say like أرى أن لا إله إلا الله? There's a difference. When you say أرى, that basically means your naked eye. That basically means your own vision. But when you say shahada, shahada is a combination of a vision and also of intellect. So when you say ashhadu an la ilaha illallah, even if you were blind, when you say ashhadu an la ilaha illallah, you're basically making a testimony right there to say, I bear witness, meaning in my mind, my intellect, and my heart is all right there, seeing what I'm basically sensing, that whether sensing through my eyes or whether sensing through what I hear, in other words, all my senses and also my intellect and my understanding for this basically goes in congruence with believing that such and such. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, فَلَا تَشْهَدْ مَعَهُمْ. Now you as a Muslim, just because they brought some shred of pieces of evidence and told you that it was a study that was done by Harvard, Princeton, whatever it is, don't necessarily just go in adopting that agenda. You want to remember that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had come to you with the ultimate, and that's why he said فَلِلَّهِ الْحُجَّةُ الْبَالِغَةُ, with the ultimate evidence, and therefore what might appear as a shred of evidence that you would have to go back and remember that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala comes with al-hujjat al-baligha, or with the ultimate evidence. So if their evidence is contradicting or seemingly contradicting with what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala basically told you, then don't doubt Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's evidence, but doubt their study or doubt their shred of evidence that it can make contain the discrepancy or not contain basically the complete and ultimate truth. And therefore Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَلَا تَتَّبِعْ أَهْوَاءَ الَّذِينَ كَذَّبُوا بِآيَاتِنَا. What is that supposed to take us into? Remember, there's al-hawa and there's al-dhann. Okay, two different things. Those are different resources right there. Al-dhann is in the first situation. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling us, well, they would follow these speculations, but they eventually may have their shred of evidence, or at least their studies or whatever it is that is based on speculation, but the true drive that probably provoked this type of a speculation or this type of narrative was actually their own whims and their own drives. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is coming to us from the future and letting us know that the story is actually the same, that history repeats itself. At one point, the people in the past, they thought that they could use their understanding of this world. And of course, we think of today as the same thing. We would think, hey, we're really advanced in science. We could use science as our tool, our human brain, our intellect, and what studies say is basically the evidence to help us understand the world. We don't need religion anymore. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, well, actually, وَلَا تَتَّبِعْ أَهْوَاءَهُمْ, don't follow their drives. A lot of the so-called studies are actually coming from a certain agenda that basically had driven us and certainly had suggested the conclusion of a certain study. In other words, it's a certain agenda. Not all studies, certainly not all studies, but a lot of these studies are not necessarily objective and containing a lot of hidden agendas that basically would drive these results to appear in a certain way. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَلَا تَتَّبِعْ أَهْوَاءَ الَّذِينَ كَذَّبُوا بِآيَاتِنَا, and don't follow the whims of those that had denied our ayat. What is our ayat? Our ayat meaning whether we're speaking about ayat in tawheed or whether we're speaking about ayat in legislation. Because you want to remember, ayat in tawheed are basically talking about understanding Allah Almighty, life and the reason behind it, the purpose of life, and certainly Jannah, Nar, the things that we may not be capable of seeing, what's behind life, all of that. That's basically in relationship to Aqidah. Legislation is basically speaking about your behavior, whether as an individual or as a society, how to organize and define ethics, morality, right and wrong, and certainly rights, and organizing people's relationship with one another. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, well, don't follow their desires, don't follow their whims, don't follow their way of life, and those that do not believe in the hereafter as the reason why وَهُمْ بِرَبِّهِمْ يَعْدِلُونَ. يَعْدِلُونَ actually means that they would go off the straight path. Al-adl is supposed to be justice, but al-adl in terms of justice is to be on the straight path. يَعْدِلْ عَنِ الشَّيْء it basically means that they are going off the straight path, off the path of justice, off the path of what is supposed to be the ultimate truth. So then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala then lets them know, قُلْ تَعَالَوْا أَتْلُ مَا حَرَّمَ رَبُّكُمْ عَلَيْكُمْ. Then you come in again with the preaching, with that preaching, and again with that ilm, and again with this level of confidence. Come over, and I'm going to teach you what your Lord Almighty had forbid upon you. And I want you to look at it. Didn't say مَا حَرَّمَ اللَّهُ عَلَيْكُمْ, but رَبُّكُمْ. The word Rabb is slightly different than the word Allah, at least in what it basically is giving us in terms of another hidden meaning. The word Rabb means Lord. The word Rabb is supposed to be coming in to let us know that He's the one that cherishes you. He's the one that gives you the provisions. He's the one that is giving you all the preservation that you are keen about. So then the ayah is also giving us the inference that Sharia or legislation in general is supposed to be coming in with the whole idea and the whole concept that this is supposed to be, one, eliminating harm, two, maximizing good. That's the whole concept. That's the whole objective of Sharia. Legal maxims are all about eliminating harm and maximizing good, and perhaps as well as bringing in discipline to help man basically stay connected to the principle. So the foundation is, let me tell you what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had forbid, or at least your Lord had forbid upon you. Why did it say alaykum and not for you, for example? Because it's also letting us know that there's a hierarchy, that there is alaykum. He's the one that is on top. He's the one that is basically the ultimate being that would have the right, as you are basically the servants and under his control and also under his power, then you would basically be in submission. So the word alaykum is also giving me the inference that the Lord Almighty is the one we turn to in submission, is the one that we recognize has the ultimate power, is the ultimate being, is the one that we would worship and that we would embrace. أَلَّا تُشْرِكُوا بِهِ شَيْئًا. So here we go. Number one, we're going to put the colon right there, that you should not associate partners with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. What is a shirk? A shirk is associating partners with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in different forms. So when you look at shirk, you're talking about three different areas and three different factors. The first factor in associating partners with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, whether in denying the essence of Allah, in other words, atheism, or whether it's in type 2, which basically is believing that anything or anyone shares powers or shares different areas of power with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Number three that helps us understand this is basically the names and attributes. So number three is connected to number two, because when we talk about, well, what do you mean by sharing powers in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or sharing powers with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? We're talking about the names and attributes. So if somebody believes that someone else is a Rabb, or the Lord, or someone believes that someone else also has the power to change the future, or has the power to grant me healing, or has the power to grant me provision, or has the power to grant me life, death, etc., all of that, or another power basically has the ability to control any of this, then that's basically shirk. The other type of shirk is basically the shirk in legislation. What do you mean by shirk in legislation? Basically, believing that someone else has the right to determine whether we're speaking about ethics, justice, definitions of justice, definitions of what you are, who you are, etc., and who defines human, who defines truth, who defines, etc. If someone believed that it is other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that's a form of shirk. We're going to get in details with that, inshallah. Then, number 2, merit. وَبِالْوَالِدَيْنِ إِحْسَانًا. بِالْوَالِدَيْنِ إِحْسَانًا. What is بِالْوَالِدَيْن? الوالدين meaning the two parents. How do you deal with the two parents? إحسانا. You would deal in إحسان, and إحسان basically means you are contributing good, but even if they had probably harmed you. Is it possible that parents can be abusive? It certainly is possible that parents can be abusive. But even when parents may be abusive, you don't necessarily deal with the mizan al-adl. Al-adl would be justice. You did this to me, I'm basically going to come back in the same direction and do the same that you had done to me. But that would be al-adl. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala told you that no, with parents, we're not going to use this type of mizan, this type of basically analysis, or at least what we would consider as a fair deal. We're not going to use that. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, بِالْوَالِدَيْنِ إِحْسَانًا, that even if they had harmed you, your duty is to come in to contribute in a way that brings good, in a way that brings nothing but you would deal with ihsan. And ihsan, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, إِنَّ اللَّهَ يَأْمُرُ بِالْعَدْلِ وَالْإِحْسَانِ وَإِيتَاءِ ذِي الْقُرْبَى وينهى عن الفحشاء والمنكر والبغي يعظكم لعلكم تذكرون. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that He orders for what is basically justice. But justice is not the best thing and let's say, the most noble thing that you could practice in your life. Justice is the minimum, not the maximum. The maximum is ihsan. That's the maximum. What's the difference? Al-adl, which is the minimum, is an eye for an eye. Al-ihsan is even when someone had harmed me, I would come in to actually contribute good, even though I may know that they would not pay it back, or they may misunderstand it, or they misuse it, etc. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in regards to parents, basically said, وَبِالْوَالِدَيْنِ إِحْسَانًا. Even if they had harmed you, as in Surah Luqman, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَإِن جَاهَدَاكَ عَلَىٰ أَن تُشْرِكَ بِمَا لَيْسَ لَكَ بِهِ عِلْمٍ فَلَا تُطِعْهُمَا وَصَاحِبْهُمَا فِي الدُّنْيَا مَعْرُوفًا. Even if your parents were not Muslim and might have done all the different forms of abuse to get you off your faith, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, فَلَا تُطِعْهُمَا. Don't obey them in leaving your religion and doing what is wrong. But صَاحِبُهُمَا. But you have to accompany them فِي الدُّنْيَا مَعْرُوفًا, on good terms and good ways and in basically good akhlaq. صَاحِبُهُمَا. When you say صَاحِبُهُمَا, that basically means you have to be a friend. You have to be a friend to them even when they had wronged you. How do I be a friend? Based on my terms or based on their terms? Based on their terms, not based on your terms. Because it's so easy to say, well, I've done my job based on your terms. No, it's supposed to be based on the parents' terms. So if your parent wants you to stay quiet, oh dear, what happened? So if based on their terms, for example, they want you to stay quiet, you need to stay quiet. If based on their terms, they want you and they expect you to perhaps do the dishes, or clean, I don't know, their drawers or whatever it is. This is what makes them happy. Well, that's what you're going to do based on their terms. Cleaning the driveway or whatever it is, that's based on their terms. Then that's what you're going to do, because it's رضا الوالدين. رضا الوالدين actually means that their terms, they're content with you. Not that, yeah, I've done my job, they're supposed to be happy, I don't know why they're not satisfied. You have to do your homework to satisfy them, period, based on their terms, not based on what satisfies you. That's why it's called رضا الوالدين, not رضا that your turn. But if they ask for themselves but for siblings, let's see what the sister is saying. Hold on. What is she saying? She's basically saying, but if they ask not for themselves but for siblings, explain the question. I don't understand what you're saying. All right. وَلَا تَقْتُلُوا أَوْلَادَكُمْ مِنْ إِمْلَاقٍ, and do not kill your children out of fear of poverty or out of lack of resources. We're going to talk about the details in that one. نَحْنُ نَرْزُقُكُمْ وَإِيَّاهُمْ. We provide for you, that is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and we will provide and basically make sure that they also have the resources as well. In other words, don't worry about the resources. You just do your homework. In doing that is sa'i fi talab al-rizq, and the rest is left on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The rest is left on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Let's see what the sister is saying right there. She says doing chores, serving siblings, etc. Well, if it's for serving siblings, the parents are basically, usually they want you to be as one family. So if, for example, your mother or your father is telling you to take care of your younger brother, they're teaching you that discipline to basically be responsible, to take care of your younger siblings, etc. So although you might see it as, well, wait a minute, I'm just doing services for them, you're actually doing a service for your parents. You're helping your parents take care of their responsibilities. And that's how you learn how to be that responsible person. So when you talk about, for example, the parents and what they want you to perhaps do, sometimes you have to look beyond your definition of what basically makes something right. And sometimes you have to see what makes your parents happy. Okay, let's continue. We'll talk about the parents inshallah in detail some other time. وَلَا تَقْتُلُوا أَوْلَادَكُمْ مِنْ إِمْلَاقٍ. Do not kill your own children out of poverty. And of course, we know that the pagan Arab, they used to kill, whether the boys or the girls, they basically used to bury them alive or even kill them as in fear of poverty, and think, well, the resources are scarce, so therefore let's get of those that are basically consumers of these resources and basically kill them, or perhaps maybe even sell them, because they used to see them as property. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, and lets us know that the resources are available. It's not a lack of resources, but it's a lack of recognizing that the children themselves are actually a resource, and that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had given them the rizq. And therefore, what you need to do is recognize that a rizq is not coming from you. That rizq and provision is actually coming from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. وَلَا تَقْرَبُوا الْفَوَاحِشَ مَا ظَهَرَ مِنْهَا وَمَا بَطَنَ. I want you to look at the word تَقْرَبُوا. قَرُبَ actually means to get near something. So what are we getting near here? What is to get near something? The word is al-fawahish. What is al-fawahish? Al-fahisha is basically the singular. Al-fahisha is a singular, basically the singular term for al-fawahish. Al-fawahish is plural. Do not get near al-fawahish. So how do you get near al-fawahish? It's basically the environment that you put yourself in. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is letting you know that you've got a responsibility not to get near the environment of where sins are committed. This is extremely important. Where sins are committed. And you want to keep in mind that the environment that you put yourself in is going to determine a lot about who you are in terms of what ideas you adopt and what behavior you basically apply in your life. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is letting you know that you have to determine your areas of what defines your own identity and what makes your identity, looking at the environment that you're putting yourself in. The area that you put yourself in, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling you, well, if it's a good area, then that is going to maximize the probability and increase the probability basically of how closer you get. If you are around good people, then that is going to increase the chances and increase the probability of you becoming a person of piety just by working and just by hanging out and just by being around good people. At the same time, if you hang out with people that are of sin, that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَلَا تَقْرَبُوا الْفَوَاحِشِ, meaning do not get near not only the fahisha, or at least the sin itself, but even the people of sin. Do not get near these people. What is that supposed to mean? Well, that's basically to let us know that there are certain people that you really have to eliminate from your life. Most of the cases that I had seen in my life, basically when they went deviant, it was usually, and I would say 90% of the time, it was the wrong companionship, the wrong friends. You go to prisons, every single one of them basically was with the wrong friends. This is not to say live in isolation, because isolation is not any less dangerous in its danger than being with the wrong companionship. Isolation from the society actually increases the chances of addiction, increases the chances of mental illness, depression, and the list goes on and on. And this is proven. This is, you can read all those studies that basically talk about that and how your chances of getting into addiction increases by being basically isolated from the society. Being in social relations with people is not necessarily just any people, but it's in being selective or in who you choose to accompany, who you choose to be friends with. Even if, just like you look at Hudayfa ibn al-Yaman, when he asked the Prophet ﷺ, what if everybody becomes deviant? What should I do? The Prophet ﷺ tells him to hold on to the Quran and Sunnah, and that would be what he will to hold on to, because he was supposed to be staying with basically ma ana alayhi wa ashabi, basically with what the Prophet ﷺ was preaching and along with what the Sahaba had learned and basically passed it on. But what if all of those people, the whole Muslim ummah goes wrong? What should I do? Basically go back to the resources to help you make sure you identify what your identity is based on, and number two, identify what choices you make in life. You would have to recognize that there are resources in Quran and Sunnah. How do we get to those resources? There's no way but in talab al-ilm, seeking that ilm to make sure that you have the right resources, you have the right definition, you have the right interpretation for the religion, for your life, and the details of how to live to take you to the path of Jannah. So, لا تقربوا الفواحش ما ظهر منها وما بطن. Do not get near the sins, whether what is apparent or whether that was subliminal. Wait a minute, what do you mean apparent and subliminal? How can there be an apparent fahisha and a subliminal fahisha? A couple differences of opinions on how we interpret this one. The first interpretation, ما ظهر منها, meaning what people whether do in public, or whether ما ظهر منها in terms of behavior, what you would do in behavior, external behavior. ما بطن, whether it's done in hidden areas, no one knows that you're probably using your laptop, it's a closed room, and what you're actually viewing on your laptop, no one knows. You managed to erase the history, you managed to delete all of those different things. No one really knows what you're really doing, except it's basically Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is one interpretation of batan. Basically, those moments when you're in seclusion. The second interpretation, batan, meaning what is hidden within your heart. So, therefore, you're seeing the contrast of one, ظهر, what appears in public, and batana, what is done in seclusion, and ظهر, what basically is an external behavior, and batana, what's an internal behavior, meaning whether it's envy, or whether it's arrogance, or whether it's hate, and the list goes on, in terms of the fawahish that are batina, the different immoral behaviors that one might do on the inside. We're going to get in details with that one. وَلَا تَقْتُلُوا النَّفْسَ الَّتِي حَرَّمَ اللَّهُ إِلَّا بِالْحَقِّ. And do not kill the human life except, of course, only the one that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had forbid killing it, unless there was the right to do so. And therefore, that would basically be done by the government or in self-defense. Or in self-defense, by the government, that would be the capital punishment. And or if we're talking about not the capital punishment, but self-defense, that would be in those random cases when you're probably attacked and you needed to self-defend yourself, and basically perhaps you shot the person, etc., and the bullet basically killed the person because they were coming to attack you. But this isn't talking about, yes, coming to attack you, meaning your mother probably wanting to slap you and etc., and you said, oh, it's self-defense. No, wait a minute. No, that wasn't self-defense. That was not self-defense. She wanted to slap you. And therefore, you would have one relationship with your mother, which is in وَبِالْوَالِدَيْنِ إِحْسَانًا, even if they were to harm you. ذَلِكُمْ وَصَّاكُمْ بِهِ. That is what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala willed for you, or at least had put upon you, in what type of behavior, what type of value, what type of merits that you would adopt. Let's see, let's count the merits. Number one, not associate partners with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Number two, to respect and certainly adopt a relationship on good terms with parents. Do not kill your children. And notice here that it basically had blended. You're talking about the major sins right there, blended major sins, and also blended along with the major sins, the legal maxims, the preservation of deen. You will not be preserving your deen unless you did not associate partners with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, unless you recognize that your parents are not to be dealt as if you are on the same level, but there's definitely a certain hierarchy, a certain superiority that you would understand that your parents have and that you do not have, and therefore you would live to recognize that this is part of your deen. This is part of living al-Iman. When it comes to respecting parents, it's at the same level of not associating partners with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's why he says, وَقَضَى رَبُّكَ أَلَّا تَعْبُدُوا إِلَّا إِيَّاهُ وَبِالْوَالِدَيْنِ إِحْسَانًا. That is talking about as if it was a religious foundation. It was a religious doctrine. Taking care of parents is actually part of maintaining, it's really close to maintaining your tawheed. That's how close it is. This isn't speaking about a secondary thing about Tawheed, but this is so close to Tawheed, because if you cannot recognize the contribution and the gratitude of what your parents had contributed in your life, then you will not be capable of recognizing all the contribution that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had given you in your life in provisions. That's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala put it within that area. Then it continues, وَلَا تَقْتُلُوا أَوْلَادَكُمْ. The second legal maxim is basically the preservation of life. Whose life? Well, whether it's your own children, or whether we're speaking about لا تقتلوا أولادكم من إملاق, so whether it's your children's life, or even generally ولا تقتلوا النفس التي حرم الله إلا بالحق. But here's the question. Why didn't the ayah say ولا تقتلوا أولادكم and then say ولا تقتلوا النفس التي حرم الله إلا بالحق, but actually say ولا تقتلوا أولادكم and then say ولا تقربوا الفواحش and then say ولا تقتلوا النفس التي حرم الله إلا بالحق? Why not put killing as in one category and not ولا تقربوا الفواحش? Here's a couple things. Number one, the person will not get to the level of killing others unless they were basically within this area of sin. In other words, the environment triggers certain falls within your mind, within your behavior, within your discipline, that will eventually lead you to killing and committing crimes. In other words, these people, when they do commit a crime, there's no way that they're living in piety and then all of a sudden this crime basically happens. Absolutely not. The person does not get to that level of killing somebody unless they had mastered and lived in a series of different types of crimes, that is al-fawahish, different kinds of sins, whether those sins are external sins, whether we're speaking about drinking, zina, etc., in that environment of, let's call them external sins, and also that inner sin, whether we're talking about arrogance, we're talking about disrespecting others, we're talking about hate, we're talking about envy, etc. Those are inner sins. Once this person basically trespasses this level, or at least, gets into this level and had completely absorbed it, that's what will take them into another series, another level of committing a major sin, which is killing others. Killing others comes basically from that environment. So when we look at mentoring, that's one beautiful thing about Sufism, is that their focus on discipline. When you say focus on discipline, you're actually talking about focus on a number of different pockets within our body, our brain, our heart, our ruh, and our body. All those pockets, they basically need this type of mentorship on how to stay, one, within the right environment, within the right friends. So they would create these groups. That's one beautiful thing. They would create these groups, and this sheikh would basically come in to mentor this person to be within that group in order to basically create this bond of mentorship, this bond of basically, when you say لا تقربوا الفواحش, what does that mean? It's basically also giving you the inference that there's another type of being in proximity, basically with people of good behavior. So it doesn't just tell you وَلَا تَقْرَبُوا الْفَوَاحِشَ. You're going to read the ayah differently as well. You're going to say, well, don't get close to the people that act and behave in that way, but I want you to get close to the people that engage in piety. In other words, finding good friends, finding good companionship, whether it's in seeking ilm or whether it's in disciplining themselves, in tazkiyah, all of that. Good companionship is extremely important in order to create this, call it a support group, a religious support group, and that's one form of therapy. Because this type of therapy, religious therapy, is not only going to mentor your behavior, but it would also help you mentor your inner self. So there would be this shaykh. Having a shaykh is also important because when you have a shaykh, the shaykh basically helps, one, create the ilm, two, create a role model, and having more than one shaykh is also important because each shaykh, and we're human beings at the end of the day, and every single shaykh might master one side of those sciences. One probably masters maybe ilm, but the other one masters better perhaps in tazkiyah. The third shaykh might master better perhaps in relationship and skill in dealing with the outside. The fourth shaykh might be better in helping mentor you in different areas of, let's say, going the ladder of ilm, etc. So when you look at each and every shaykh and what they could mentor you in, this is extremely important, but certainly when you look at companionship and friends, etc., sometimes you may not find this companion. Sometimes you end up traveling somewhere else, etc. You be the leader that you wish to find. If you cannot find this leader that you hope to find, you be the leader. You be the person. You be the role model that you always had hoped to find. I'll tell you, it is very possible that you may never find even the shaykh that you look up to as a role model, and you would be disappointed by this shaykh and that shaykh or whatever it is. It is possible. That's because they're human beings. They're not angels. And therefore, you may sometimes need to be the role model even for the shaykh that probably had the ilm, but not the best discipline. So sometimes you got to keep on reminding yourself, tawasaw bil-haqqi wa tawasaw bil-sabr, that as a community, you would support one another on truth and support one another on patience. ذَلِكُمْ وَصَّاكُمْ بِهِ لَعَلَّكُمْ تَعْقِلُونَ. That's what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala basically commanded you with, or wasakum, in other words, wanted you to hold on to that bond, and la'allakum taqilun, for that may actually help guide you to becoming mature, to becoming basically aware, because al-aql has two meanings. Al-aql can mean to be firm on something. So we say, i'qil wa tawakkal. The hadith talked about women as lacking aql, but that doesn't mean intelligence. Lacking aql means whether determination, firmness on matter, etc. So when you see لَعَلَّكُمْ تَعْقِلُونَ, this is to let you know that once you put these into practice, you put these as your discipline, that will put you on a principle, on a foundation where you are determined to practice truth. You are determined to basically create a solid foundation of, let's say, vision. Let's also say solid foundation in creating your identity in, one, confidence, because al-aql means to affirm something. That's confidence. Two, aql also means understanding. Okay, so when you look at لَعَلَّكُمْ تَعْقِلُونَ, that you would have a foundation of understanding, and you would also have a foundation of creating your own foundation of what your identity is. وَلَا تَقْرَبُوا مَالَ الْيَتِيمِ إِلَّا بِالَّتِي هِيَ أَحْسَنُ. And do not get near the wealth of the orphans unless it was for the good. So we're using that money. Perhaps you're the guardian and the sponsor for these orphans, and they happen to have money that their parents had left behind, but then you come in to basically use that wealth to what is basically supposed to be in their service. حتى يبلغ أشده, until they reach the might. What are you talking about? Are you talking about might in terms of body? Or in Surah An-Nisa, it was basically talking about فَإِنْ آنَسْتُم مِّنْهُمْ رُشْدًا فَدَفَعُوا إِلَيْهِمْ أَمْوَالَهُم. Rushd is talking about, let's call it mental maturity. Ashud is actually talking about physical ability. So we're talking about in this ayah, it's telling you, well, there's a correlation between physical ability, whether the ability to get employment or probably get a job, or perhaps maybe we could see that this person is man enough, but that's not enough, because we don't want to just look at your physical ability. We also need to see, is this person also mature mentally, as in Surah An-Nisa. وَأَوْفُوا الْكَيْلَ وَالْمِيزَانَ بِالْقِسْطِ. Now it's basically taking us into a different level. So you're looking at resources now. In terms of resources, if the person is vulnerable, like an orphan, then in that situation, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling you, well, that becomes your responsibility as a society to basically preserve the resources for the orphan, and as a society as well, in doing business, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling you, well, there's another area that in order to ensure that within the society there's justice instilled, certainly our vulnerable people are going to be our priority, but that also would mean, even if you are in a position of perhaps maybe being the capital in terms of money, or probably the businessman, or probably have the resources, that you would engage in trade, in justice, fairness, and certainly in honesty in such transactions. So whether we're speaking about, whether we're talking about in volume and how the sizes, if things are basically traded in size, or whether we're speaking about things in trade that is done based on weight, that you would be fair and just in making those trades and those transactions basically possible in the most just ways. So what is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala telling us right there? That whether you are in a position of power over someone vulnerable, or whether you are in a position of power because you basically have the resources, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling you that you need to always consider that your center is supposed to be based on justice. Now, when we say justice, this is not at all to put you in a position where you're just contributing more than what you can handle. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala then said, لا نكلف نفسا إلا وسعها. No soul would be asked to do, or at least burdened, or given an obligation more than what it can handle. What is that supposed to mean? Whether it's a calamity, that you probably lost a job, or probably got a disease, or whatever, it's not going to be more than what you can handle. It's going to be within your scope. But that second that you may feel that is more than what you can handle, don't give it up. Put the amount of effort as much as you can, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will put in that energy, that power. That's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala basically tells us, وَالَّذِينَ جَاهَدُوا فِينَا لَنَهْدِيَنَّهُمْ سُبُلَنَا. Those that would put effort in, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the amount of effort, if you, any contribution that you would basically contribute in, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will open doors. They didn't say one door, but said doors. And these doors would open up to help you basically find your resources, basically give you more capabilities, more potentials, even when you may feel that you had your shortcomings. Just put in the effort, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will bless this effort to pushing you farther and farther and strengthen you onto the principles of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. وَإِذَا قُلْتُمْ فَعْدِلُوا. And when you say things that are of justice. Notice that whether we're talking about al-qist or whether we're speaking about al-adl, justice is the center. وَلَوْ كَانَ ذَا قُرْبَى. Even if there was a conflict of interest, perhaps these are relatives of yours, and if you were to probably support the relatives, you might get a share of it because there's a conflict of interest. Or perhaps if you were to speak against your relatives and you witness basically injustice and truth, that they might basically come at you and harm you in different ways. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling you that commitment to justice should be your religion, should be your principle. So whether it's in commitment on what is considered as part of aqidah and considered part of your iman, or whether this is commitment in legislation, it's all supposed to be right there in legislation. It's all supposed to be centered around justice. وَبِعَهْدِ اللَّهِ أَوْفُوا. And be committed to the bond, to the principles of Allah Almighty. When you say awfu, in other words, be committed to the principle, be a person that, one, learns it, two, basically uses the most effort to stay committed to it, and three, even when they are challenged or probably given the opportunity to not be committed, they would still put in the effort to live that bond, to live the truth, despite the challenges, despite the offers. And certainly that's what it means to build the courage. So therefore, when we talk about awfu, we're talking about recognizing justice. We're talking about being patient despite the pain, despite the hardship. Three, being committed despite the offers and probably somebody luring you to perhaps let go and not struggle with that pain, but you basically will later develop courage, nobility, and you basically become the person that had mastered, inshallah, ذَلِكُمْ وَصَّاكُمْ بِهِ. That is what your Lord Almighty had taken upon you, لَعَلَّكُمْ تَذَكَّرُونَ. For that may enhance within you the reminder, the commitment. When you look at تذكرون, it can mean to remember. تذكرون can mean to say or remember something, etc. Now, when you look at لعلكم تذكرون, this one is لعلكم تعقلون. Why? Because when you are basically founded upon these items, this basically gives you an identity of affirmation, identity of commitment, an identity basically of confidence. But when you are committed to the justice that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had taken upon you, that is what is going to bring you that reminder, bring you that connection. وَأَنَّ هَذَا صِرَاطِي مُسْتَقِيمًا فَاتَّبِعُوهُ. And that this is my straight path. Then therefore, فَاتَّبِعُوهُ. Then look at that fat right there. That's telling you, don't let there be any time of procrastination, but instantly فَاتَّبِعُوهُ, and follow it. And the word فَاتَّبِعُوهُ is basically telling you, take it whether gradually or consistency or with a pattern. And at the end, وَلَا تَتَّبِعُوا السُّبُلَ, and do not follow the different paths, whether that different path was called a different religion, or whether it's a different cult, or whether that path was a different interpretation. وَلَا تَتَّبِعُوا السُّبُلَ فَتَفَرَّقَ بِكُمْ عَنْ سَبِيلِهِ. Because what if you were to follow a different cult, a different interpretation, deviations, etc., that will eventually get you off the path of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. In other words, you may think that I can adopt westernization, and I can adopt liberalism, and I can adopt communism, or I can adopt probably, some culted, etc., and also embed it with Islam. What you're going to find yourself is that فَتَفَرَّقَ بِكُمْ عَنْ سَبِيلِهِ. This will deviate you away from the path of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala eventually. So ذَلِكُمْ وَصَّاكُمْ بِهِ لَعَلَّكُمْ تَتَّقُونَ. This is what your Lord had taken upon you so that you may live in that taqwa. Now this one, لَعَلَّكُمْ تَذَكَّرُونَ. That one was لَعَلَّكُمْ تَعْقِلُونَ. This one was لَعَلَّكُمْ تَتَّقُونَ. Why لَعَلَّكُمْ تَتَّقُونَ? Because when you embrace that commitment in all the different paths that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had taken upon you, in the Sunnah, in probably certain details of Islam, that those details are supposed to enhance this armor that protects you away from the deviation at large. So when you look at لَعَلَّكُمْ تَتَّقُونَ, the previous one is لَعَلَّكُمْ تَذَكَّرُونَ. The one before it was لَعَلَّكُمْ تَتَّقُونَ. It's talking to you about an identity first that you basically commit to in having the right vision, لَعَلَّكُمْ تَذَكَّرُونَ, the right reminder, لَعَلَّكُمْ تَتَّقُونَ, the right protection to put that armor to keep your deen grounded. This is basically the surface interpretation, and inshallah we'll go in details and actually talk about what did al-Qurtubi had to say about all of this, inshallah. So this is right there until 153. Okay, so if there are any questions, I'd be happy to answer them, inshallah. There's a lot that al-Qurtubi wanted to say. Let's sneak peek and see what al-Qurtubi wanted to say. So فَلِلَّهِ الْحُجَّةُ الْبَالِغَةُ, and هَلُمَّ شُهَدَاءَكُمْ right there. But let's see this one. This one, قُلْ تَعَالَوْا أَتْلُ مَا حَرَّمَ رَبُّكُمْ. Al-Qurtubi had 14 different notes to say about just these 3 ayat. 14. So we're going to get some homework done. And remember, all of this is basically to help us learn our identity, learn our Islam, and certainly to keep us grounded in learning how we can become لَعَلَّكُمْ تَعْقِلُونَ, how we can become لَعَلَّكُمْ تَذَكَّرُونَ, and how we can become لَعَلَّكُمْ تَتَّقُونَ. All of that is basically the key to learning all of this. 14 different matters. We'll talk about those, inshallah. For the time being, if there are any questions, be happy to answer them, or you can basically unmute yourselves and go ahead, or you can write it in the chat. Let's see, right here, the sister is basically writing something in the chat. Let me see what she said. Oh dear, it actually, okay. She said, but if they ask not for themselves, but for siblings, doing chores, serving siblings, especially if they are married. So here's the thing, dear, fair enough. Should we, our parents are probably asking us to help our siblings, etc. Helping our siblings is a way of mentorship. It's a way of support. One day, you're going to need help. One day, you're going to need this type of aiding. Remember, when you help your brothers or your sisters in doing their chores, etc., well, that is living Islam. The Prophet ﷺ said, whoever is at the service of their own brothers and basically brethren, whether sisters, brothers, etc., Muslim brother or sister, or even biological Muslim brother, biological brother or sister, at the end, man kana Allahu fi auni akhi, kana Allahu fi auni. Man kana fi hajati akhi, kana Allahu fi hajati. If you are in support of your brother or sister, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will be there in support. If you are in service, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will be basically at your service as well. Whenever you need that service. Right now, you're probably not in need of this. And people will remember, and even if they're not remembering what you had done, remember, it's an opportunity to get rewards. It's an opportunity to get a reward by helping others and supporting them and so forth. All of that is also going to be basically that support for us. It's coming at you. It's coming at you. So be in service, not for the sake necessarily of their service, but for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You do what is pious, do what is good, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would be at your service. Don't wait for them to return the contribution that you had done or whatever service that you had done. Don't wait for them to return it for you and say, one day, you know, I did this to you, I did that. Oh, you just right there, you just dropped all the good deeds right there, just at that point that you bragged about it. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَلَا تُبْطِلُوا صَدَقَاتِكُمْ بِالْمَنِّ وَالْأَذَى. Don't lose your contribution by doing men. What is men? You're bragging about it. Remember when I did this and this to you? Remember when I, etc. So that is men. Or al-adha. Oh, since they didn't do the service that you expect from them, you come at them and say, you know what? I'm going to harm you in 1, 2, 3, 4. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is basically right there teaching us that the one that you would wait to give you the reward for any good contribution that you had done is basically Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, not the people. You do what is right for the sake of Allah, not for the sake of people. So when you help your brother, you help your sister, you help your siblings, that's just do it for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Just do it. Help. You're going to have a day, and they're going to have a day, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is letting you know. You are there in support for them, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will be in your support. Okay, so I hope I explained this one. And right there, inshallah, if there are any questions you'd like to unmute yourselves, go ahead, my friends. And mashallah, I can see mashallah, very good numbers right there. And mashallah, I could see that they're going and leaving. So I'm really confused about that. Wondering if the internet